Carolinas Crime Analysis Association. I'd like to welcome you to our July webinar with Amanda Bruner. She'll be going over ExcelerateYourCompstat. Before we get started, over in the chat, you'll see there's some things that she has posted. There's the disclaimer in there, slides. You can see this recording afterwards. It'll be up on our website. Also, down at the bottom of the messages is a survey to fill out. Make sure you go in there and fill that survey out so we know what you guys want to see, what you thought about it, should we bring Amanda back, things like that. So at this time, I will hand it over to Amanda. She'll get started.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Caleb. So as Caleb mentioned, today we are going to be diving into Excel. So before we get started, I'll just go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Amanda Bruner, and I am a crime analysis advisor for the CNA Corporation. CNA is a nonprofit organization that does a variety of grant administration. So I support a variety of different grant programs, including Public Safety Partnership, Project Safe Neighborhoods, and the Crime Analyst in Residence program that are all funded through the federal government. So in that capacity, I travel to different agencies and provide crime analysis training and technical assistance. Before starting with this job, I had started up the crime analysis unit at the Matthews Police Department outside of Charlotte. And prior to that, I was an intelligence specialist for Bank of America. Outside of my primary role, I do serve as the president of the Carolinas Crime Analysis Association, and I teach crime analysis for Radford University and University of North Carolina at Charlotte. So with that being said, and as Caleb mentioned, in the chat you will find the link to the slides. They're in Canva, they'll stay up, so you'll be able to access that link at any point in time going forward. There's also a link to a Google Drive that is a template, which today's presentation is going to be based off of. You should be able to download and adapt that template as you see fit, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through today. In addition, there's a few other links for training resources, and then as Caleb mentioned, the recording will be posted on our website in the members only area. If you use your login and you're a CCA member, you'll be able to access that recording. Otherwise, it will also be posted on the BDE Analytics LLC page as well with some other CCA webinars from the past. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started with the disadvantages of manual data processing. So here I have a screen recording. This is taken from a Southern Software RMS. And this is oftentimes how I see analysts pulling different stats out of their RMS system. So basically going into the front end and building out a manual search. So here I've said it's not unfounded. I've put in a date range. I'm looking for a particular offense code. Here it's 23C for shoplifting. And all of those steps just to get one number for how many shopliftings occurred in that particular time frame. What we're going to talk about today is how do we use raw data from a database to get these same numbers in a much quicker fashion, and how to put together a comprehensive product that you can use to help inform leaders within your agency. Now, the next thing you may be thinking about is, well, my RMS already has automated reports. However, matching that last video, these are the reports that, again, they come out of Southern Software, and this isn't meant to pick on Southern Software. Every RMS has a variety of front-end canned reports that come out of the system. This is what those look like. I typically see that sometimes the end user or an administrator can have a little bit of autonomy in changing these reports, but in general, they are canned. They are delivered by that RMS vendor, and they don't really tell you a lot of information. So for example, on the screen here, I just got general numbers on my first report. The second report does have comparison with percent change, but you can only do months. You can't do day ranges. And then the third one, again, it's just some general count. So what if we want to dive into this a little bit more specifically? Now, I do want to preface with there's multiple ways to do this. And I understand with a lot of analysts using Power BI, you can by all means create beautiful stat sheets in Power BI. Today's example is going to be based on using Microsoft Access and Excel. So this is the proposed solution. This is a biweekly stats report that looks at Part 1 offenses as well as a breakdown of citizen and officer generated calls for service. The way that this report is structured is it compares the current 14-day time period with the previous 14-day time period, the current 28-day time period with the previous 28-day time period, the current 28 last year as well as the year prior, and then year to date for this year and 2 years prior. So that's what all of these columns are. Now, there's a lot of numbers on the screen, but I do want to kind of just throw out the disclaimer. We're really only going to use about 2 formulas that we're going to copy, paste, and manipulate throughout this entire process. Now, if you don't want to have all of these columns, by all means, you have the template, delete them out. If you don't want to have all these rows, by all means, delete them out. You can shrink this down, you can add to it. This is based on part 1. You could also make this for group A stats, different calls for service, anything that you can imagine. The concept is the same. It's just easiest when I provide instruction on this using the template. So as I mentioned, the idea here is going to be to take our data out of our RMS server. We're going to pull that into Microsoft Access, where we're going to build a query. And then we're going to link that query over into Microsoft Excel. We're going to use some formulas in the template to develop the final stat sheet. So first up is basically linking the Microsoft Access database to the SQL Server. So this is just where we're going to pull data in from your RMS server into Microsoft Access. The reason that this demonstration is based on Microsoft Access is it's free and incredibly available in any Microsoft Suite package. So most of you all are going to already have this on your computer. Now, to establish this piece, the ODBC connection, if you don't already have that on your machine, you are going to need assistance from IT or your RMS vendor for the credentials to that server to establish that ODBC connection. Once it's done one time, you're not going to have to do it again. The other thing here is really important when you do bring that data in is that you are selecting the link option. And this is going to allow it to sync with the database. So if something changes from an ag assault to a homicide in the near future, that's going to show up in your data because you're syncing with the system. So again, this component here is something that you would need assistance from IT and potentially your RMS vendor. But by all means, please message me after if you need any assistance facilitating that discussion or how to ask for that connection. All right, and so just to kind of go through a couple of background pieces here, I'm going to talk a little bit about the database itself and the structure of data from an RMS system. So this slide has 2 different screenshots. One is of all of the different tables within this RMS system, and then the image right in the middle of your screen is a view of one particular table of data within it. So just as a reference point here, the database is the collection of information related to the particular subject. So that would be the entire RMS database. And that database is filled with potentially hundreds and maybe 1,000 different tables that store data in them. We then use queries. That's how we find and retrieve data. We're going to talk about that today. And then forms are how you can view, add, and update data. We won't touch on that. And the same with reports, which are ways you can actually build in Microsoft Access reports that output. We're going to build our report in Excel, but you could also do this in Access if you wanted. So I'm going to talk here about the spreadsheet problem. So imagine if your chief said, we're going to get rid of our RMS and we're just going to use an Excel spreadsheet. This is what I have: report numbers, dates, times, and locations. So imagine with me for a second, we've just got an Excel and we're just writing 991, all of the fields, 992, 993, and so on. So far, so good. Well, what happens when we want to start adding some additional information? These are just additional columns in our imaginary spreadsheet. Well, we've got offense 1, offense 2, offense 3, offense 4. In theory, we have to have an infinite number of offense columns because we would never know how many offenses are going to be on any particular report. The same goes for names. So at this point, what we had initially was a few columns. Now we're into dozens of columns. Now we're getting into hundreds of columns. And our spreadsheet's getting really, really big because we can't really account for all of the possible things that every report's going to have. So it's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So what our RMS is a collection of different tables where instead of displaying this data horizontally, we are going to display this data vertically. So what that means is inside the database are different tables. It is a relational database that we'll talk about here in a second, but each table has different components. So we're going to have an incident table with our report number, our NIBRS code, and maybe our offense information. But what you'll notice here is instead of going across the page, we're now going down. So each offense is its own line within the table. So 991 is on 2 rows within this table. Then we keep going. What is our next table going to be? This might be our suspect information. Again, it's going to be vertical. 991 has Anderson and Smith both as suspects within that report. Well, what we have right now is instead of our massive spreadsheet, if we got rid of our RMS system, is a bunch of different tables collecting different pieces of information. This is what's happening behind the scenes in your RMS. What we need to do is to create joins between these tables. So here I have kind of a standard incident table. It has report number, date, time, and location. In the center, we have report number, NIBRS code, and offense, our offense table. And at the bottom right, we have our kind of suspect name table. And what we can do is create joins based on report number, which is the common column between each of these tables, and that's going to allow us to query data out. So just as kind of a reference point here, I'm not going to dive into it too much just for the sake of time, but this would be a screenshot after a ODBC has been established and the data from an RMS has been brought into Microsoft Access. So I'm looking at the fields within an incident table, an offender table, and an offense table. Now each of these tables has incident number in them, and so I can create my join based on that common field within both of those tables. Now it's important to understand that there are different types of data relationships. So what that means is we could have a one-to-one, such as incident to maybe a location table where there's only one location where the offense occurred on every report. Or we could have a one-to-many, which is represented here with both offender and offense, in that on every incident report, we could have multiple suspects and or multiple offenses. So that is what we're going to be dealing with today. We're going to be looking at offense data and trying to calculate some of our statistics. So this is just a little bit of the background knowledge necessary for how we're going to query this data out. So as another representation here, just to kind of give a little bit of a different view, this would be looking at potentially a master name table in your database as well as a vehicle table that are joined off of person ID to owner ID. This is the same field, just with a different identifier in both of those tables. So in the master name table, my information might appear, and in the master vehicle table, there's going to be a series of vehicles with who owns them. And if we create a join off of this, you could write a query that says, I want to see how many vehicles Amanda owns. And it would result with each of these being on their own line in the output of that query. So with that, how do we know how we want to query? What are some different criteria? So again, this example today is going to be based on Microsoft Access. So up on the screen here is a QR code to the Microsoft queries page. And there are a couple different drop downs there that will give you more parameters. So there's examples of query criteria. And that drop down is really the one I would most recommend if you're getting started. And essentially what this is going to allow you to do is see how you want to prompt Access to reduce down the entire data set for what you want. So I'm not going to go through each of these, but just as a reference point here, if we want it to match a value, we're going to write the value in quotes as our criteria. If we want to do it within a date range, we're going to offset that with pound signs. And there's just different things here, or, and, like, and so forth, that are terms that if you're working in Microsoft Access, you would want to become familiar with to help, again, narrow down your data set to really just pull out what you're looking for. So where this comes into play is we're going to take all of our offense data, we're going to select out just our property crimes. So we're going to use this criteria to select out those property offenses, and then that's what we're going to build our stat sheet off of. So here we're going to build a query in design view. Now, if you're advanced and you know SQL, by all means, write your SQL statement. This example is just going to be based off of using the design view for the query designer in Access. And we're going to have a couple different fields that we want to pull here. So I'm going to start by bringing in a couple of my tables. Now, in this example, I know it looks like they're queries. It's just the way that this particular RMS is set up, but imagine these as tables. So I want to look at my incident table and my incident offense table, or maybe in your RMS it's just called offense. So I've got those two tables here, and I'm just going to make those a little bit bigger so that we can see the different fields within them. And I've already got my one-to-many connection between these two tables established with the line in between them. I'm then going to start double-clicking the fields that I want to appear below, which are going to be in my output. So first, I want my incident number. I want to see all of my incident numbers for the criteria that we're going to designate. So then I'm going to bring in incident date, case status, and my offense code. Now what you'll notice there is incident number, incident date, and case status all came from my primary incident table. My offense code came from my offense table. That's why it's important to have that join there, because we're pulling data from both of these tables. Now I'm going to start adding in my criteria on the criteria line. And I know it's very small up here on the screen, but again, you can always refer back to the slides, zoom in, and so forth. But I'm going to use a date range here that's just greater than or equal to January 1 of 2019 up until today. Today is represented as date with an open and closed parentheses. In Excel, that would be the same as today. But this is just a date range. So pull everything that occurred after January 1st. I'm just narrowing it down. This RMS had decades worth of data, and I didn't need to pull all of that. For my case status, I've said not you, which in this RMS meant not unfounded, because I'm not going to include those unfounded offenses in my final output. And then for my offense code criteria here, I'm going to include some or statements. So 220 for burglary, 23A, 23B, 23C, all of those larcenies, or 240 or 200 to get my motor vehicle theft and my arson. Up here, then I'm going to click run, and this is my output. So I've got incident number, incident date, case status, offense code. Now, I will say here that if you want to bring in additional fields, attempted, completed, the type of location, suspect information, all of that, by all means. But this is really just looking at some just preliminary statistics of how many have we had, are we up, are we down, just some general overview of creating an automated product. So at this point I've ran it. I can always go back into view my query design. I can also go into the SQL view if I want to actually see the SQL code behind that query. But if I go back into design view and I close this, I am going to save this. This is very important. You need to save your query. I highly recommend you save it as something that you're going to be able to find easily when we go into Excel. So I've named mine here Bruner CCAA. I'm going to save that, and then we're going to see it on the left side with all of those other tables here. And this is just a select query. By all means, you can make this a make table query, push it to another database if you need it. But that's going to be accessible for use in the next step. So now we're going to go into Excel. Now, I have the template in the Google Drive that's linked in the chat, and there is a sheet within that template where you can actually load your offense data directly into that sheet. Otherwise, in this example, I'm just loading it into a blank sheet. But I'm just going to open up an Excel, and I'm going to go up to the Data tab, and I'm going to select Get Data. From there, I'm going to say From Database. I'm going to go select that Microsoft Access database where I just saved that query. In this example, mine is called ad hoc, so I'm going to select that, and then it's going to preview all of the queries and tables on the left side of the screen. So I'm going to go look for that one query I just built called Bruner CCAA. And there it is. I'm going to select it. Now, there's another option here that you have the choice of. We're going to see Load, Transform, and Close. If you load the data at this point, it's just going to load it in. That's what we're going to do. However, if your data is messy and you need to do some transformations, click Transform, and that will open up Power Query, where you can, maybe you need to make a date field a proper format, maybe you need to trim some things, whatever it is, you can by all means open up Power Query and clean up your data. But in this example, I'm just going to go ahead and click Load. And now, at the press of a button, I have all of my offense data now loaded in Excel, which is going to be accessible for me to build formulas off of. And all I would have to do at this point, if I wanted to refresh this, would be to click Refresh over here on the right in my Queries and Connections, or go up to Data and click Refresh, and it would just pull new data every time I click that. So if a report got written right now and I press that button in 5 minutes, that report's information is going to come through on this tab in my Excel sheet. So now we're going to get into the template itself. So this is just a portion of the bigger template. The template that's in the Google Drive does have both violent and property crimes broken down. But for the sake of preventing too much redundancy, I have just isolated this instruction down to just be the property section of the template. So we're looking at property offenses, those date ranges I had discussed at the beginning of the webinar, and then we're looking at burglary, larceny, motor vehicle theft, and arson. So through the next 40 minutes or so, we're going to work through what the formulas are that's going to go in here. All right, so just as a very basic overview piece here, a formula is just a script that produces output based on data. So you may have used sum, average, if, month, day, so forth. There are a number of formulas, but we are going to use to our advantage the color coding feature in Excel to help keep track. These formulas are going to look very, very complex, but we're going to break it down. We're going to go step by step so that it's approachable. So first up is sum. Now you could use sum, or you could just use and select a cell and do the plus sign and then the next cell and so forth. But we're going to start out with just sum. Our property offenses line is just going to be the sum of burglary, larceny, motor vehicle theft, and arson. So I'm just going to go ahead and select those. Equals sum, open my parentheses, and I'm selecting those 4 cells that I want to add together to give me my sum of all of my property offenses. Now, I don't want to have to do that in every column where I need a sum. So I'm going to copy that formula and I'm going to paste the formula over into these other cells. So I've copied it. I am now selecting and holding where I want to paste it, and I'm going to paste that formula. So if you didn't see, the paste option I'm selecting there has FX on it, where it's copying the structure of the formula. So with one formula, copy and paste, we have now completed all of our sums for our property offenses. And we can do the exact same thing for larceny and theft. Our larceny theft line is just going to be the sum of pocket picking all through all other larceny, the 23A through 23H under NIBRs. I'm going to then copy and paste that sum across the row, paste with that FX, and there we go. We're one formula in, and we've completed 2 lines of our template. Now we're going to move into the date ranges. And the key component here is that our finished product, the stat sheet that we're building, is date dynamic. And what that means is that all formulas in this spreadsheet refer to one cell. Whenever that cell changes, everything in the worksheet will update based on that single cell. Now, I do recommend that you use $ for absolute cell and column references. That will make copying and pasting formulas easier throughout. But we are always, every formula we use is going to be based off of this date dynamic cell. And you'll see it represented in the template as end of period. And then this one was 7/30/2022. Now you have several options for what goes in that cell. Some people use equals today, and it would just be today's date. So your stats would run up until today. Now, some may argue, well, today hasn't ended, so maybe I should do today -1, and it would go until the end of yesterday. That's an option. Oftentimes, I run my stats off of the previous Saturday. So I run stats from Sunday through Saturday, and then it gets published on Monday, so that if there's any corrections on Sunday, I know everything's processed. And so that formula is today minus mod weekday today and 7. It's just saying that the 7th day of the week is Saturday. Again, you can copy and paste that formula. That formula is actually already in the template itself. Or your other option, you have all the freedom to choose. By all means, type any particular date you want in that cell. Then anything is going to go up into that. So if you wanted to change that date, you could make it 12/31 of 2023, pull your year stats for last year. You can change it at any point in time, because everything is just going to refer to what that cell is. So it doesn't really matter what's in that cell. That's just a reference point for all of the other formulas in our worksheet. So we're going to dive into that a little bit more as we talk through this. Now, I told you we're going to use basically 2 formulas. We've already talked about sum. So now we're going to transition into count if. Count if counts the number of cells that meet a criterion based on the corresponding columns. And we're going to break that down and explore really what that means. But for right now, the item I want you to know is that count if is for single conditions, just one. Count ifs are for multiple conditions, so both date and offense. So a date range and an offense is going to be count ifs, plural. And everything is going to be based on pairs. Go to this column and find what. That is the pair. Where do I look? What am I looking for? Where do I look? What am I looking for? And we're just going to repeat that process over and over and over. So here is an example of a count-if formula that is representative of burglaries for the previous 14-day time period. Again, I'm going to go through this step by step, but for right now, what I want you to remember is C23 is our date dynamic cell, otherwise known as our end of period. So whether that's today, yesterday, the most recent Saturday, the last day of the year, whatever it is, that is our end of period date cell. And again, we're looking at burglaries for the previous 14-day time period. So we're going to break this down. We're going to start with an equal sign because all formulas start with an equal sign. So equals. We're using count ifs because we have multiple conditions. So it's going to be plural. Then we're going to open our parentheses, and here's where we're going to begin with our pairs of criteria. So first, where do we want to look? We want to go to our data tab, and we want to look in column D, which is our offense column. Now, again, depending on how you loaded your data, your offense column may be different, but in this example, I'm looking on my data sheet in column D, that's my offense column. The exclamations points here, they just indicate we're going to a different sheet in the workbook, but we're looking at that entire column. That's the first part. But what are we looking for? 220, we put it in quotes, it's a value. We're just looking for burglary. So what we've said is I want you to go count on my data tab, look in the offense column, and find all my burglaries. If we stop there, it would just tell us how many burglaries were in the entire data set. But we want to narrow it down because we want to have a particular date range. So this is where we're going to go with our second set of criteria. So stay on the data tab, but now look in column B, which happens to be our date column. And I want you to find everything that was that burglary that happened after our lower date boundary. So greater than or equal to our date dynamic cell, which is on our stats tab of our worksheet, minus 27. Now, the reference point here is we're looking at the previous 14-day time period. So trust me for a second on the numbers here for the dates. I'll break that down in a second. But what we're saying is greater than or equal to our date dynamic cell minus 27. So it needed to occur after 27 days before our date dynamic cell. That is our lower date boundary. Then go back to the data tab. Again, look in our date column, and now we want everything that occurs before our date dynamic cell minus 14. That is our upper date boundary. So what we have here are three statements. Look at our offenses. We only want 220s. We only want them if they occurred 28 days before our date dynamic cell, and we only want them if they occurred then before 14 days. So it's the previous 14-day time period. So we have said what we're counting, what offense, a lower date and an upper date boundary. So where I get these numbers, where we're looking at here, minus 27 and minus 14, comes from this calendar here. So if my date dynamic cell, my end of period date or whatever is last Saturday, minus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you can obviously see all of these numbers are here. That previous 14 is represented as minus 27 and minus 14. Our current 14 would be minus 13 up until 0. That's how these date ranges are structured. It's just Friday was 1 day before Saturday, Thursday was 2 days before, and so on. Now, it doesn't matter, again, what day is in your date dynamic cell. This is just representative of last Saturday. The counts still remain, even if you picked a different date. So at this point, to just kind of give you a jump start so you don't have to count on a calendar, I've put in the date ranges. So previous 14 is going to be our date dynamic cell minus 27 up to minus 14. That's our lower and our upper date boundary. Current 14 is going to be minus 13 up until the end of period. Previous 28 is going to be minus 55 up till minus 28. And the current 28 is going to be minus 27 up till the end of period date. So now I'm going to actually put this formula in. So I'm starting out, I'm typing equals countifs. I'm going to my data tab and I'm selecting my offense column. This is the first part of my criteria. So I've selected my offense column. By all means here, I would recommend those absolute column references. But then I've put in quotes 220. Remember, I'm just looking for burglaries. Then I'm going to do my second pair. Select my date column. Now I'm going to do my lower date boundary. It needs to be greater than or equal to my date dynamic cell. I need to go back to my template worksheet, which is over here. Select that. And I'm going to say minus 27. Again, I know it's difficult to see on the screen. By all means, please zoom into the slides within the Canva to see this. I'm going to do my third piece. I'm going to go back in. I'm select my date column again. And now I'm setting my upper date boundary. Less than or equal to my date dynamic cell minus 14. Got to go select my date dynamic cell again. Excel's making it really difficult to select here. I'm going to select it. I know it's my C23. I'm going to close my parentheses, press enter, and automatically I'm going to have a count for the burglaries that occurred in the previous 14-day time period. So automatically I have that 5. If I refresh this at any point and new reports got written, that number is going to be here. This sheet is live. You don't have to go and type those numbers, pull them all one at a time. Nothing. It's all set for you. Now, just like before, I do not want to do this process over and over and over again. So I'm going to go ahead and copy it down the column, but I want to be careful and cognizant that I don't paste in my larceny theft row. So I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to paste it in these subsequent cells, and I'm going to paste that formula. So that formula is there, and as you can see, they're all 5s because they're all still referring to 220. So I'm going to change these to those NIBRS codes, 23A, 23B, and so forth. And just like that, this column is going to be complete. Now, I do think that it's important to mention, if you're an advanced Excel user, by all means, create a column off to the side that has your NIBRS codes. Use that as an additional cell reference. You don't actually have to change the codes. Have the codes off to the side and refer to them. But for this example, I just find it easier to actually type them in. So I'm typing 23F, 23G, 23H, and so forth. But again, I've only had one formula that I wrote from scratch this entire time, and we've already done a couple rows. We've got this column almost complete, finishing out with arson here. And just like that, our previous 14-day column is done. Now, at this point, you would just copy it over for current 14, change the date range, previous 28, current 28, and so forth, because our date ranges were right here. You can just copy it and change those numbers. So at this point in time, we would have previous 14, current 14, and our 28-day ranges complete. And so now we're actually going to skip ahead over to our year-to-date columns. And this is where we're going to use a little bit of a different formula, and then we're going to come back to our 28-day ranges. So looking at our year-to-date section, we are going to use what's called a nested function. And it's when we use a function as one of the arguments of a formula. So we're still going to use the countifs that we've been working on. But now we need to somehow tell Excel, when did the year start? And so to do that, we're going to use the date function, which is date, and then it has the year, the month, and the day. And so we know that we're looking at 2022 year-to-date, 2021 year-to-date, and so forth, but we want to specify this a little bit further. So I'm going to break that down. Again, I don't want to write this formula from scratch again because it's long and complex. I'm going to copy the formula. I'm going to come over here into my current year-to-date. This example is just based on data that went up to 2022. I'm going to paste my formula. I haven't done anything to it yet. But now I want to start changing. So I need to change where I'm looking at my lower date boundary. So here, I'm saying I want to look at January 1 of that year. So I'm saying, hey, pull the year from my date dynamic cell, then pull 1-1. That means January 1, right? This is my lower date boundary. Count everything that occurred after January 1st of this year. So I'm going to refer to my date dynamic cell, say, hey, what's the year from this? And then 1/1 for January 1. That's my lower date boundary. My upper date boundary is just going to be my date dynamic cell up until the end of the period, right? Current year to date is just January 1 of that year up until that date. Now you can use a date function here that I'm typing where we say date C23 for the year and the month and the day, or you could just use C23 for this particular cell. So I'm just saying, again, January 1st of this year up until the end of period, which is our most recent date that we're putting these stats out on. I'm going to close my parentheses after I enter my day. I'm going to close those parentheses. We're going to press enter. And I've got a count, 48. Now we can do that same thing where we're going to copy that down, the rest of the column, change out those offense codes, and we've done another column in our worksheet. Now we want to look at previous year to date. It's the exact same thing, except instead of taking the year from our date dynamic cell, take the year and then subtract 1 from it. Take the year and subtract 2 from it, and so forth. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this formula over, paste it in my previous year, and then I'm just going to open up that formula and I'm just going to add a -1. So now it's saying January 1st of last year up until the date dynamic cell, but the year -1, so last year on that same day. It just happens to be in this example also 48, but it's really a different time range. And then I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to change it to -2 and -2 because that is 2020 year to date. And again, I could copy and paste those down, those columns. So this is what I would have at this point. We've got our 14 and 28, and we've got our year to date copied down. The last tricky section of this, and then we'll move to percent change, which is always a little bit easier. The last section of this is to look at the current 28 days, which in this case was 7/3 to 7/30. We're going to look at it last year and the year before. What we're going to do is we're going to mash together the formulas that we use for our 14 and 28 day ranges with the formula we use for the year-to-date range. So we're going to use the -1 and the -2 off of the date function, but then we're also going to use our -27 up till date dynamic as our upper and lower boundaries. So what I mean by that is we're going to copy our 2021 over, because we're looking at 2021 about a particular date range. We're going to say the year -1. We want the month from our date dynamic cell. And then for the day, we're going to subtract -27, right? Because we're looking at the current 28-day range. We know that that is our lower date boundary. So I'm just selecting my date dynamic cell again here, and I'm going to write -27. And then we can press enter, and we will have a count. And then we can copy that over to the 2020, which is 2 years prior to when this data set ended. And I'm just going to change those -1s to -2s. So we're going to say, hey, take the year from our date dynamic cell, go 2 years before it, and then go up until that date dynamic cell. And again, I would just copy those down the column. So we would be looking at this point in time. So we've completed our 28-day ranges as well. Now, there's just a couple things that we can do to finish this off, but otherwise, the vast majority of this template's done. The next thing I want to look at is my percent change. Now, we've all used this in different reports. We've all heard about this in stats class and so forth. New minus old over old. Now, I see this talked about often on the IACA forums, different email groups and so forth about how do you represent percent change if it cannot be calculated. So all of you, I'm sure, have put it in and it will say cannot divide by 0. And that's the whole idea where if it's over 0, it's undefined. So what are some other options we might be able to use? So oftentimes I see analysts use an if error statement, which says, hey, if this errors out and you can't calculate it, put NA in the cell, or put a dash, or put a squiggly, or put whatever. I like to do something a little bit different that builds on that. that says if it's undefined, I want to see an arrow that is either an up arrow or a down arrow that is showing me how it changed. And so that is this formula here. I highly recommend just copying and pasting it out of the presentation because of the arrows, the symbology is just easier to copy and paste. But you can copy that formula into Excel and change out your new value and your old value. So that's what we're going to do here. So I'm going to copy it. I'm going to paste it in my formula bar, and as you can see, it says the exact same things I just told you, new and old. So now I'm going to go pick what's my most recent value, what's my old value, what's my new value, old value. We're just repeating it over and over. This is where the colors really help us out in Excel. So I'm just changing. For reference, current 14 is our most recent, that's our new. Previous 14 is our old. I'm just changing these out. Got one last, as you can see, the last portion of this formula is just the traditional percent change. I'm going to change out that last one. I'm going to press enter, and I'm going to copy this down the column just like I have done with everything else. I already have conditional formatting set on this, but I'm going to go through that here in a second. So this here would be the conditional formatting that I have set. So if the cell contains 0%, it's green. If it's a down arrow, it's green. If it's less than 0, so negative, it's green. Everything else is red. This is a really good reference point if you want to set the conditional formatting. And so this is our finished product. So as I was saying, what this percent change formula does is if we went from 2 to 0, right, new minus old over old, this would say it's, we're going to have a decrease here, like a down arrow and 2. We went from 2 to 0. If we went from 1 to 0, we have a downward arrow of 1. If we went from 1 to 0, again, downward arrow. Over here, when we have 0 and 1, instead of saying that that's undefined, it's going to be an up arrow with 1. This just allows people to grab a little bit of additional context, especially with small and rural agencies where your numbers from 1 week to the next or 2 weeks to 2 weeks are so small. I oftentimes hear agencies be like, it's a 100% increase, it's a 100% decrease. This just gives a little bit more context to that to be like, well, actually we only went up 1, or actually we only went down 1. It kind of really fights that argument. And then again, this already has that conditional formatting on from the previous page. So as you can see, those decreases are green, increases are red, and so forth. You could by all means do conditional formatting on your larcenies. There's just so much going on in this sheet. I tried to cut it at some point, but those are some different options. So where does this take me as it relates to automation? Now, I highly recommend the series of small steps on the LEA podcast YouTube page. There are a couple different videos on there that I'm more than happy to send anyone that talk about linking data from Access to Excel, that query portion, as well as how to record macros. I truly believe that no macro was ever originally written. I go on the internet, I find something that is vaguely what I need, and I modify it. But there's this new feature in Excel that can help speed up this process. So if you have the developer tab enabled in Excel, we can actually record a macro. There's going to be this record macro button, and then you can actually go through the steps that you would to print this out. So in this case, I'm going to select the sheet that I want to print. I'm going to go to print. I'm going to say print to PDF, print my selection, and so forth. I'll go back in and I'll stop that recording, and it's going to have a macro that I can just run because I don't want to have to do that process every single time. Sometimes it's a little janky, the record macro, so this macro I do know is correct. Obviously, you have to change out the range of the cells, and then yours is not going to be a Bruner desktop. But if you want to take this macro out and modify it, what this would do is you would refresh your data. It's already included in this. See, active workbook, refresh all. So all you got to do is just click this macro, and next thing you know, you've got a PDF on your desktop with your stats. That's all you would ever have to do. You don't actually have to do anything more with your stats. And you just click that on a Monday, hand it to command, you're done. What potentially took hours before now takes about 5 seconds. If you're interested in some continued learning, by all means, feel free to reach out. That template that I uploaded also has some rolling timelines in it. This is a representation of one that's completed. I'm more than happy to provide some supplementary material on that. That template was developed by Charlie Gibberti and some of his colleagues. And another component, if you want to take this automation even one step further and you don't want to actually click the macro to run it, you can actually go into Windows Task Scheduler on your device. You can have it open it, run the macro, and close. And then at 8 a.m. on Monday mornings, that PDF would appear. Maybe it's on your shared drive, your desktop, or whatever for you to share with command. Now, as it relates to the template itself, I do want to talk through this just for a second. It's kind of zoomed in on this view, but you can always click the link. So this is what the template looks like. This is the bi-weekly stats with the violent offenses also included. Each of these columns, you'll see they're obviously all 0. That's just because this is all referring to the offenses tab where we don't actually have any offense data. There's also a monthly template in here. That's the same thing, but going across, it has each month. It will only show data up until the last day of the previous month. Again, I have both of these templates available in Group A, Group B. If you're interested, I can send those to you. So your best application for this is to either load your data when you build your query directly onto this, or load this data onto a new sheet and use find and replace for the formulas to refer to your new sheet rather than referring to the offenses sheet. So you can do find and replace, look in formulas, and you can say, hey, instead of looking in the offenses column D, I want you to look in Cassie data column B, whatever you want to name it. The other thing in here, like I said, the rolling timeline template, these will automatically calculate if you have data here. And then there is, this obviously doesn't have any data in it, but just as that reference point. And then the last sheet within this workbook has the percent change, time 2, time 1. That's just a different way to compare new and old. It has the count if broken down. If you want to kind of see that in a little bit of a different explanation. This has the macros to print out bi-weekly and monthly or export to PDF, just in case you weren't able to copy from the Canvas slide previously. The next item I want to mention is that the template that's in there is red and black. By all means, change what you need. So this is an example from the Blacksburg Police Department. It's in their branding, has their patch on it. They've also added some additional offenses at the bottom. So their final output has basically some sexual offenses and assault offenses broken down. And then on the next page, I believe Lindsay Peluso is on this call. This is the Fuquay-Varina Police Department crime stats. This one also has additional breakdowns for actual attempted homicide, rape, types of robberies, and then weapons used in ag assault, as well as types of burglaries. So again, feel free to adapt, add rows, change the colors, add your patch, do whatever you need. But hopefully this gets you at least a little bit of something started. You don't have to start from scratch. All right. The last item here I have is just some general resources. So that first QR is going to be the slides, second one to the template. The recording will be posted in the CCAA members page of our website. So if you are a CCAA member, you can log in and access that recording. It should be up within the next day or so. And then otherwise, we do have a policy where speakers also get a copy of their recording. So it'll probably be posted on the BDE page. And there's some other training content as well as some other webinars that myself and Charlie have done, both for CCAA and other organizations. These are the exact same links that are in the chat. And then with that, this is the QR code to my LinkedIn page. By all means, feel free to reach out to me, and then my email is listed at the bottom. I'm more than happy to jump on a Zoom, talk through this further with your particular data set, and if you have any issues with the template at all. All right, that's all I have. I'll turn it back over to you, Caleb.